This is the world's most strange problem, the problem of consciousness. We all have a secret world in mind, where we think, memories, dreams, things are moving inside. This is our private theater. Everything you can see, can feel. We talk to you here. Dreams. Think of your mistakes, future plans, regret, everything expected. This is our most real part of conscience. But what is it? Where to come? Why came? It is difficult to understand. Human beings for many years trying to understand concussion. People in different ways over different times. As in the old Greek time, Heraclitus called consciousness a great space and never get. Augustine said the mind as a large sea world in which the caves of memories, the mountain is everything. In every deposit, people are disassembled by their minds. Then when the science grew like the geology popular, people began to think of conscience in layers. As the ground layers have concealed the past, the way of the mind is also hidden in layers. 19. The people in century believe that what we think, they are a small part. The real things are hidden in the unknowables. Then when the chemistry has been deposited, the mind began to break into small parts. Just as the steam engine crazes like feelings, sensations, etc., and so on, subconscious assumed an energy that becomes a disease. The dream comes out. Now it's a metaphor of thinking basically. Real reality no. First this topic was called mind-body problem. Now after evolution, how did the conscience begin? How did this feel, dreams, pains, love, hopefully come out of all, from a simple matter or physical thing inside? Where and how did it start in evolution? Now other has told some of the main things. As the first conscience edge a property of matter. Some scientists such as physicists believe that confuseness is a part of the matter. As the square falls on the table, interaction of both is a process. Similarly, the dots come in. The square table knows. The bus complexity is different to the table square on this theory, or the actual question does not respond, because it simply talks about the intersection of the matter, not the inside felt. The second tier says the consciousness is not in the matter but only in the living things. Consciousness as a property of protoplasma. The smallest living cell starts with the convulsivity to the human being. A lot of scientists saw small organisms such as amoeba, paramecium, and thought that these may also lead to conscience. When amoeba finds food, paramecium is saved from abscale. We think he is thinking, but really we've been feelings are putting on it. Heavier is caused by physical chemistry and not from inside thinking or concussion. The back part moves much when the half body is cut, even in the case of Ivan Worm, but the brain does not matter the part. We feel pain. That's actually our feel. No worm. Worm movement is a mechanical process. When people combine conscience with protoplasma, question how to decide whether there is conscience. The third theory that consciousness starts when living, learning, or associated memory in beings. Meaning that an animal could change his wife to learn something from his experience. He was considered a conseer. As learning has been evident, consciences have also come. It was believed. Other also made the plant and procrement on protozoa by thinking itself, but there was no access. Run into the team edge by hoping paramecia. If you don't see the right learning, you won't even think of conscience. When extraditions were made on higher animals such as flatworm, earthwise worm, fish, reptiles, then they showed learning. Autumn is an evolution of anxiety, but later understood that this python is wrong. We just don't see the learning process when we see inside us. Things like specialty conditioning are not at all. So why did so many Syrians consider learning and conscience one? It is a large confusion associationism of psychology in history. This school of thought was said that consciousness is a space in which sensation and idea live and learning from their association. Mind is formed. Learning, consciousness, and experience submix. That's why the scientists put great emphasis on animal learning. But it's clear that there's different things to learn in Washington. The forward will give the oscillator and proof. Then another theory came. Consciousness edge and metaphysical imposition. All of the earlier things believed that conscience came from the biological evolution, from the simple natural selection. But a group said that it is not possible. Can it be true that so powerful ideas inside us, billiards, creativity all come from animal behavior? Why? The human being is lonely who tries to understand himself and the world. We invent, write poems, create computers, ships send in space. What to take from an animal's simple behavior? The intellectual life of the human being, culture, history, science is everything of a different level. There is nowhere in nature. It seems like evolution went to a level, and it came to pass in human beings. Some of the scientists looking at the defense again went to the metaphysical expulsion. He had to say that conscience says just from matter neural selection cannot come from. Some other external forces should be something that can explain different things like consistence. Alfred Risselvais also said that when the commencement of life, there is some metaphysical force on the commencement of conscience and commencement of civilized culture. Vass put his life in a long time periodicism. The science community in the same affair cited them. The problem was that just natural things in science were explaining a lot. It's ASID another theory I helpless spectator theory. This totally materialist view. It was said that there is nothing but nothing to do. Everything happens from brain's wiring and reflexes. Consciousness is simply a useless little shadow. No power. Train bells that do not control the train. The same conscience that does not control the body. Whatever to do is brain's wiring disassembled. Consciousness is simply a melodies. If foam is a shadow on the river that follows, then nothing can change. William Jaynes gave the best disconnection of this theory. He said if the conciseness is just an important shadow, so when we work something new or tough, why consciences are the most strong and why consciences are reduced when we work a lot of casual. This is the relationship component, and any theory will have to be expelled. Emergent evolution theory was so that consciences can be saved from the position of just a useless spectator and the psychic responses that appear in the saddened defense evolution. The main idea of this theory is a metaphor, as water weightness cannot be understood from hydrogen and oxygen. Others' consciousness also emerged as a new thing in evolution on a stage that cannot be understood by its part. Lord Moskin lauded this idea in 1923. This theory said that as things were complex, new properties emerged, such as new compounds are formed in the chemistry. Living things are formed in biology. One day, out of the conscience cell living things, new relationships are formed at every new level and new emergence come. When consciousness came, she began to guide brain's work and uncheck the behavior law, and the psychologist and the biologist gladly adapted to this theory as it now began to explain an important thing different from physics, chemistry. But still the questions were left. When did the concussion in the evolution? Which animals came in? What type of nervous system should? When the initial excitation was over, it turned out that the basic price is the same. The main problem is that the emergent evolution simply recreates old thinking. Everything is left. Spacefix does not respond. At the same time, when emergent in biology evolution had a crease, another strong was coming into the theory. Behaviorism. Behaviorism refused the entire coherence of the whole. Behaviorism said that there is no conscience, is just the behavior independent. It is very old, but John B. Watson gave it a new name. First, it was the same as the helpless spectator theory, but after World War it became more bold. Only focus on reflexes, stimulus response, reinforcement by removing concussion. People in the US wanted objective facts, so the behaviorism was shattered in psychology. Attention to expenditure. Ignore what is going on inside the mind. The laboratories have experienced extras and separated from the psychology philosophy. But in reality it was a method, not a true woman. When the people felt the concierge from the inside, the officials did not talk about it. Behaviorism cleaned psychology, but was the real problem of conscience. Another approach is the conscience of the reticular activation system. When mind's problem solved is not people go to anatomy. Think that conscience is hidden in a spatial brain part. The new research suggests that a network of reticular fixation brain stems can be important for conscience. It activates the reticular activation system complete brain. This stops when it comes to anesthesia. Cut it down. Stimulate and sleep opens. This system controls sensory and motor signals. So the cystists think that this can be the center of conscience. When viewed the evolution of the reticular formation, it's the oldest part of brain, so revealed, meaning that the syllabus may not be deemed to be the original of the conciseness. The second major mistake is that we translate the twigs into neuroscience. But don't think that heavier has to first understand. Only brain can be understood. If we have complete brains wiring diagrams, then just don't know if there is conscience. We must first understand what is conscience. Only at the level of brain can say something. Others says that now you have to understand correctly what is conscience, and it is difficult to understand. History has so condensed this subspect that it is now the first task to disassemble what is not conscience. What is conscience when someone asks us? So we immediately see inside us and think we're pleased is the same conscience. We think that conscience is the basis of everything we think, memories, moods, decision, and everything happens in our mind. It's all wrong when we check this seriously. All this is just a mask. Actually, the conscience is something else. That's confusion, because of which the true origin of conscience did not understand. Consciousness means people take different ways, but often take wrong. As someone becomes unconscious, it is said to have a conscience. But in reality, he also eliminated the reactivity that is different. In everyday life, we do many things to do without thinking. As we are writing only, pens are holding, the poses are set. Manger is just a matter of writing. Sometimes we don't notice anything. We react on everyone react does not contain concise. We think that we are conscious at all times, but it's not really. Consciousness is like a flashlight. The flashlight cannot be detected when the light is off. We can also feel the same where there's a light of conscience at. No other time is required. We just think that there's always a conciseness running, but there are many gaps that we can't feel. The strange thing that many work tends to be without conscience, like playing piano, dancing, running, playing tennis. When the human being becomes convicted, the work becomes worse. Those who are good are not confusing. When we are talking or writing, more focus is on pacing. We do not pay attention to words or letters. The work will stop if we are convicted on everything. People think conscience records everything like the camera, but we don't miss a lot of things. Whether it's every day, we do not know which side of the room door opens, which color is up in the stoplight or phone, which letter on the dial is with which number, as long as the specific notice is not made. Meaning we only remember when we have already seen consecution. When we remember, we often make new images according to ourselves. Real memory does not occur. There is a kind of geese. We remember most of the things from the sight of others or by making your story. Original feeling or image is not maintained. The second confusion is that people think that concepts are just formed in conscience, but it's also wrong. The concepts are all in the middle of the creatures, like the cat has a combination of the tree. When it comes to escape, the bee of the flower, to the evil of cliff. The concepts are necessary to start the work, but he does not come to the direct conscious mind. When we think about a tree, a spatial tree is missing. No general concept. Concepts often deal with language, not from direct concussion. So the real thing is that conscience does not seem to be so oblivious. Our maximum daily work memory is accompanied by no conscience. When we understand that conscience is just an illusion, is a mask. Our memory, experience, and thinking is largely subconscious or automatic. And we are missing a lot when we think we are sincere. People think that conscience is not without learning. Whatever the meaning is, learning is in the conscious mind. The associationist psychologists also think that the ideas are found or come together to learn, whether humans or animals. But in reality, there are three main ways of learning: signals, skills, and functions, and there is no need for conscience in three. If the air blow after the light is given on the eye, in the Pavlovian conditioning such as signal learning, the eye begins to blink only once the light is seen. People don't know what they've learned when they make this extradition. Unless concise try to blink, learning takes place. As if the food account time is playing different music, the mood becomes good after listening to the same music. It goes without learning. And when you know that music and food, there is no way of learning if the connection is. Being a sense of meaning sometimes becomes interruption in learning. In the learning of skills, the role of consciousness is low, as if the two coins are taken in hand, bounce into the air, and hold it to some practice. Work can deteriorate when you are more convicts. Let's learn quickly without thinking. This is the case of typing. Shortcuts or new methods come automatic without thinking. The new way that the human being is desperately. The habit of typing wrong is also automatic, and in order to fix it, repeat the wrong thing in a concise way, the mistake goes. Meaning the practice does not occur in the concise mind. Solving solution learning like problems. The role of conscience also takes place in just starting, in setting the round. After that, the process becomes automatic. Just as someone speaks of words, and every time he speaks of plural, make good or smile, so he seems to speak more plural words without thinking, but he does not know that he is learning. In an experiment, when girls the compliment was given if he had worn the red, after a few days, all started wearing the red without going to go that the extradition is happening on them. Meaning learning also leads to conceptual minds without convergence. There are also experiments where the noise stops on the movement of the small muscles of the thumb, but the human beings do not know that they have learned something. Meaning learning is also full of conscience without conscience. Chronic thinking in the signals, skills, and functions three that cannot be learning without convergence experience. That's wrong. There is no human being who is possible read more problem solvent. Thinking is the same thing. When people think, there is a main part of conscience. As you pick up two things which is heavy, you feel on the weight of the real decision that is automatic. Conscious mind cannot see the process itself. It has been shown in multiple experiments. When people are given words in the word association and respond quickly, the process of decision is automated. The process of thinking in conscience said no. Just get the first instruction. Author speaks of this instruction and then comes to response. Every kind of problem, whether the figure has a pattern or a speech. We do not choose the word when we speak or write. Just let yourself go out. Conscious mind gives bus instruction. Everything else becomes automatic. So the real thing is to learn or think that we understand the main work of conscience. It is not really a conceer. We just find the preparation, the material, and the resume we see. The middle process is automatic. Consciousness is not in that process. People understand that the strength of the regeneration comes from just conscience. But it's wrong to complete the Billy. There are both different things to regeneration and logic. Logic tells the correct mistake. On the real life that the thinking moves is the mostly automatic. There is no need for conscience. Whatever small things we think, choosing the way, fixing the right word, the color or size of something, all without conscience. Often when we have seen the first that a wood floats on the water, we assume that the second will float even when we miss the causally next time. This is the work of the nervous system and not the concierge mind. Even deep thinking or regenerating is often accompanied by no concussion minds. Sometimes we speak instantly. You can't answer when someone asks how to think. Behavior of others, understanding their emotions or their intentions is often automated without conscious thinking. It is quite often slipped to have a concussion, or puts interruption in the process. This is the experience of the large scientist mathematicians. His most important ideas come suddenly in the cart, bathroom in, without any planning while walking or bed. Previously, a little conscious thinks of the problem from the mind, then leave, then come to an end. Meaning the impression seems to be a little concierge mind. On real reasoning solution or new idea comes automatic. The process does not appear in conscience. Now of the location. Everyone thinks that conscience is just inside the head, being something behind the mind when we think. On the inside of the head is just the tissue. No inner space. It's just to think of us way. The old people thought to be in the heart. Some people still think that thinking is in the chest. No matter what your conscience can imagine in any room or anywhere. Actually, he is simply imagery, no reality. There is no single place of conscience. So, there is no reactivity in the performance of skills. Neither spiking, writing, or reading is required. Experiences do not record it. Learning, judgment, thinking, reasoning can be all without conscience and her. There is no location. Just think of us. So the most instant and shocking thing is that a human race is possible that everything can do. Speaking, solving the problem, jazzing, reasoning without consecution. This idea is strange, but it will make sense to the next. It is difficult to understand further discussion as long as you don't believe that a society is possible without conscience. What is now left when we remove the first wrong ideas about concussion? What is that if there is no base of consciences, learning, judgment, or thought? Other talks of metaphor and language. The greatest strength of the language is to make a metaphor, exploiting a thing like another known identifiable thing. Every metaphor has two things. One who has to be expelled means metaphored, and one that is explained by the use of metaphor, as the foot of the page or the head of a table. Languages are formed from such metaphors, and new metaphors continue to understand new things in every new generation. The concepts of science are also similar metaphors. In physics, such as force, field, resistance, or physiology, branching the machine or thinking the body's defense. In medicine, as the languages evolve, the real metaphoric piecing of words hides and we just begin to understand the normal word. As to be means the real had a grow, or a breath. Now no one pays attention to its metaphoric origin. Now we try to understand the conception. But what does it mean? Understand something means to find a family or metaphor for him. As the first people called electric storms the battle of gods. Now friction, spark, or air bump think. No matter what happens in real, we also think of modeling in science as the atomic model of the Bohr. Understanding means connecting data with a known identified model, creating a kind of metaphor. But the rest of the things we can't understand as we do, because we don't have any other thing that's exactly like conscience. This is why it is always difficult to understand anxiety. All of them were caused by taking raw metaphors about consecutions as soon as they were earlier. Just as consciousness speaking a slate or camera or thinking that it does something or has a physical space. In all these thinking, there was a misuse of metaphor. Other do a new word use. Analog. Analog is a special model that is always formed from the same thing whose analog is such as map and real land. Map is an analog of real land, but the paper and the land is different. Seeing the map that it is Mount Blank or a metaphor. Now the language of the mind is also based on the mostly metaphor. When we talk about thinking, remembering, or taking a decision, we call C solution or clear one-headed or deep-minded or broad-minded or gated of my mind says. Mind space is a metaphor of real space. We speak of thinking that a thing is in the back of the mind or is by or we are approaching or retouching someone. All use real space activity to make a metaphor for mind. Not only metaphor and metaphor in every metaphor, there are other associations associated with that matter. That is the paraphors that affect the original thing, i.e. on paraphors like snow blankets the ground. The warmth of the blanket in it protection. Sleep also comes to snow. In everyday speaking of love, the softness of the everyday, the fragrance, the forks all come to the feel of the love. Similarly, in the case of mind, when we do the solution, the mind's eye or mind space becomes a metaphor. So, conscience is also a kind of poetic metaphor that keeps itself generated by the language. This process is organized, so the structure of the conscience seems as the physical world. But there is a special thing of the analog, how to make and use different is. The paper for the map maker is the metaphor. Land is a metaphor for the user and understand the map by using it. The same conscience is formed from the paraphrase of the expressions, but when we use the conscience work ahead of making the base, future, diseases, plus, or past pay, and so we understand the world. The most basic identity of conscience is specialization, meaning mind creates a kind of space in which we think of keeping things. As if I say I think about my head, then the foot again, morning snack, then the Tower of London, so all different places are set in the space of the brain. We also think of a space in mind, as the year put in a line, right arraying from the left. We see everything by arraying in a mantle space, whether it really does not act in physical space. The second is that we never see or think about anything. Just one piece of it comes to an image or a spact mind, just as the circus says, the first clowns or tropics mist. If you think of yourself, the resent will come to mind any work or image. This exemption looks at everything, people, place, or memory, and that's why our personality, mood, and relationships are also different. As we like someone, we remember the best moments. Not bad. Recall starts with exemption. The first is a small shone or churn and then the surrounding memory. The third feature is analog eye. Our mind has a fake copy that can do anything in the image. We can think that we are going from the other way or taking any disease or doing something in real life without trembling. It creates an analog eye plan, imprint, and sees options. The fourth is metaphor M. We look at the eyes of ourselves in that moment when we do something in our imagery. I'm looking from the inside, and sometimes look at yourself away. As a second stop is seen. I'm looking at myself from the outside. Both I and M are used to create a story inside the mind. The fifth feature is naturalization. We always see ourselves like the character of a story in mind. Our life is a story that engages in new sins, new people, new decisions in the story. Anyone who is missing, planning, or thinking, selects things that fit into this story. The rest becomes ignorant. Every work, every dissipation, we cherish the reciting in our story, whether true or false. Synthesis is the condition. As animals match their first knowledge to see things, at the same time we fit the new thoughts or sashes into the mind, make the compatible. We try to find a place if it comes to two different thinking. As the Mido and tower together thought, then the tower Mido in the mind standing in. Depends on our learning experiences and the structure of the world which ideas, images, or stores fit. Others says consciousness is an operation, no matter, or storehouse. It works with an analogy, creates an analog space in which the analog eye can rotate, take the decision, think, create the stories, and connect things to each other. Consciousness works just on the same things that have come in the first bed, meaning that all the activities of the mind are an analog of any action of the physical world. It model tests can also be in our daily experience. And the biggest thing that if the consciousness is based on the language, the consciousness began after the language. That's not as old as people think. This means a complete view of the history and origin of consciousness that is very important and shocking. First of all, we thought that conscience is a very old thing. Perhaps there was also animals and the language in the army was already before it came. But now when the other in the previous chapter pointed out that only after the consciousness language the whole scene has changed. Now that we have to understand when the conscience came, we have to see how the civilization with the oldest handwriting was in the state. What was the mind of the people in the words written? The oldest writing is of Egypt and Mesopotamia, but the language of the language has not been fully understood today. And when the context is unclear, the scrollers put their thinking. That's why it's not clear whether there was conscience in those people. But then comes the Greek epic Iliad, written around 900 to 850 BC. On the story is probably of 1230 BC. Eliot's other says it's like a psychological document and see if there's a mind's concept. Iliad does not have basic conscience. Whatever the words are intended for mind, soul, or will today were in a more physical or direct sense at that time. As psyche means breath or blood, thumos was just a movement or energy. Phreon was the area of the stomach. Nous was just to see or notice. Not only was the concept of will, no question of free will, and there was no one word for the body, just different body parts are referring to. Early Greek art has also appeared in body pieces. The whole body does not look like a unit. So the question is how to do when these characters did not have consciences or their desire. Answer is that everything used to disassemble gods. The heroes of Eli do not make some plans. Some do not think. There is no introspection. When you have to do something, a god gives a voice or an instruction as a family man. As the Achilles stops the god, anyone motimates, speaks to take or give something to someone. When someone is mistaken, The blems do not put on the goat on themselves. I did not. Just got it done. All this appraisal. Own POM is also the voice of God says. Bird is just channel. The meter of the poetry also puts the effect on brain. Blue Jaynes the immunities. It also creates trance-like experience. Those who are gods is a chulti hallucinations, as schizophrenic or epilepsy are presence. It was said as zone of R, organized only inside the god's mind there are patterns, and every hero gets his different voices or guides. Greek gods do not make anything crates, simply give advice, order or direction, and there is no big feeling like fierce and or gratitude, just shock or surprises when God gives some new installations. Some of the options come, as if all this is the implication of the same poet Homer or has been replaced with story time. Others says the hidden tablets and archaeological evidence shows that the considerable factories of Iliad are the base on the history. So this is not a pure fiction. It is not necessary that the same man has written. Bars had long trades that heard by remembering the story oral. So there is a little change, but the main structure remained the same. Another objection: if every man follows his high hallucination, the society consists of cows. On linear B, tablets shows that the Mashian society had a considerable residency. People listened to the voices of authority and king also listened to his god. In the real world, the society was moving on greenery and most of the higher freedom has appeared in the oral poetry in Iliad. But actually systems hierarchical was. A little subjugative or self-talk appears on some places in POM, as hectors or ignores talk to themselves. This alone blems others, but scholars believe that these parts were later added when a little consciousness began to come to the society. The main part of the absolutely different intelligence shows which does not have their own thinking, planning or internal mind space. The nature of the human being at a time was divided into two parts. There was a part God that gave the order, the second man who followed the order blindly. Both in there was no conscience. It seems strange to us as we are sincere. We think that everybody will have some feel inside, some will think, but others says that the human being of that time was not like we are. Our hands, legs, eyes are all working without thinking when we are driving the car. Our conscience says are probably busy. And another thing, if you remove the conscience says from this exam, then just have the same savings that were left cameral. Everything is going to be unthinkable until a new hard. When new problems come, he weighs person for his voice to tell him what to do. Now this was what the order of voice or God seemed to be. A lot of normal people sometimes hear such a voice as a voice or an advice heard in the stress. Other himself points out that at a time he listened to a loud voice that was almost like a second escape in a room, but there was no one. Some people listen to the voice of their dead relatives every day and they can be normal people, not just a mental present. Old research suggests that quiet people's specialty never hear the hallucination in the deposit. Hallucinations in Russia and Brazil. Schizophrenia are very common in some country. There are sounds. Sometimes a voice, sometimes many, sometimes one of himself, sometimes of a god or ever of a machine. Sometimes voice threatens, sometimes advises, sometimes makes fun, sometimes orders. Many times the present feels that their thinking tells the voice before them whether or what to do. Sometimes the voice comes from one side, from the top, ever from the bottom. Ever seems like getting out of clothing or wall. Ever voice criticizes the thinking and execution of the present. Sometimes the order is received only if the purse hasn't found some of its own side. Many patients, especially deep patients, see hallucination in sign language or gestures appear. It all shows that the system of listening to hallucination is formed in the nervous system in advance. Anyone may have hallucination in any form if he cannot hear the purse. Visual high hallucination also occurs, but less. But when it occurs, very vivid. As at present, a car is looking to fly a wing. Many deaf people sign languages or imagery people see angs, spurts or any objects. Stress is the relationship of hallucination. The level of stress in normal people should be very high. Hallucination occurs only. Schizophrenic also gets a little less stressed in people, but the threshold of the stress was very low in the old 25 deposits. As soon as a new problem, conflict or decision comes, Parson listens to hallucinated voices by the same way what to do. That's why the time people follow their God's voice without thinking about making a decision more. Just as Achilles or Hector found a voice of a god whenever he had a big heart. Why did the question come? Why did I consider? Sound is something that can't ignore. Can't close the ear on the eye. For a few seconds when we listen to someone, we take their identities inside us. Means are slightly obedient. When he is a command, we begin to follow him even more in bicameral mind when the voice from any place without any physical human being, without any distance or boundary, without stopping. The authority of that voice is above all. He learns in his culture that this is the voice of God. So, without thinking for them, it means that the voice that has been heard is the same. He believes. Other asks what was happening in the minds of the bicameral man, meaning how possible happened that the mind of the human being at a time worked in such a different way. First of all, the focus comes on the speech areas as in the Bible mind. The tabler of the language was roll. The spike manly in the right-handed is in the left hemisphere. The supplementary motor area, Broca's area, and the most important Wernicke's area is all on the left side. But it has also been shown that the right hemisphere also has the similar structure, and some people may shift to the speech right hemisphere if the left side is worse, especially in childhood. Then the question arises that if the right hemisphere has the capability of the speech, then his role, what was it? In today's date, the right side does not have the function of the speech, because if the right side is removed, there is no more problem. But it could be that the right hemisphere had some special work in the old time. Others' theory is that normal speech and thinking was on the left hemisphere and organized the right hemisphere's chaos-fitting Wernicke's area admonitory, i.e. the illustrating experience, and sent it to the left hemisphere in the form of voice. Interior meshes through this mind connects parts. Specialty temporal lobe. The mean was the voice of God from the right side in a way that listened to the left side and then triggered the body for action. There is two versions of theory. The strong version says that the direct language-based voice was formed in the right character cage area and was sent to the left, as a person is speaking and listening to another. The weaker version uttered that the quality of voice was formed in the left, but his direction came from Pisces and different identity right. Other 5 observations it's to support. The first 2 hemispheres can understand language. The man cannot speak if the left hemispheric damage occurs, but right hemisphere can still understand things. The commands can follow. Split brain can also understand the right side command in the presence. Some traces of godlike function in the second right hemisphere. In the famous experiment of the Wilder Penfield, when the right poster of the epilepsy presence in the temporal lobe, which is equal to the Wernicke's area, the sound began to be heard. Sometimes music of someone is ever sounded. The relatives never shout any morning memories of childhood, or the people's voices seem to be heard in the real world, such as halo hallucination, as the middleman had to accumulate. Hallucinations mostly was the voice of the other people's admonitory, i.e. the scolder, shared or stranger space. It was the memory of your acres. When the left hemisphere stimulated, it was less and does not have much intense. The third is sometimes the relationship of both parts of the brain, just as the relationship of mind and God in the bicameral deposit. Split brain is shown in the presence that both hemispheres can act differently, just as there are 2 different personalities inside a human being. Fourths of the 2 parts today are different, which also look into bicameral literature. Left logical analytical language regenerating. The work of the right is relayed with more images, music, emulations, and warnings or advaminifications. It is in the same way as the role of God in the middle mind was to give advice or warning, and the mind simply followed. The 5th brain can change from the environment. Learning and culture organization changes. The journey from Bicameral to conscious mind can be the result of most e-learning and culture. Julian Jaynes. Penfield's experiment meets that the voices that come from the stimulation in the right temporal lobe are not real memory. They remember most of the admonition warnings or any authority figure, and the present is positive in his action, just listening, reacting. That's exactly what happened in the experience of the voice of God in the Bible mind. The 2 parts of damage that were considered in the brain model of the bicameral mind, God and mind work and thinking did differently. It is also possible or not for this split brain is given the exam of the presence. The operation of the people in which the connection between the 2 hemispheres was cut, which can lead to epilepsy control. After operation, such presence see normal, but when the spatial tests are carried out, the 2 hemispheres are separated from each other, like 2 different human beings in the same mind. In the test, if anything is shown in the left side, i.e. the right hemisphere, the present pointed with the left hand does not speak on it, meaning both hemispheres can hear and understand but can just speak the left hemisphere. If a time shows different images on both left and right side, then the left hand draws something else and the present speaks something else. As both hemispheres have different address what is happening, the right hemisphere complex instances can also understand and respond to. Raise the razor from the left hand, such as the razor gold. Emotions are also triggered in the right hemisphere. The present will blush if the nude photo appears, but speaking left hemisphere will speak. Not seen anything. In the exam of the order, the right nostril, i.e. the right hemisphere, got a smell. The present react will not be called the name. The name will also be given to the left nostril, meaning basic emotions or feelings reach the left hemisphere, but not spatial info. Split brain studies show that both hemispheres can diverge like different independent persons, as a man and his God in the Bible. Then other explains that the cognitive function also both hemisphere is different. The job of gods was to guide, plan, organize, fitting things in a pattern, and it looks in the right hemisphere. Clinical evidence suggests that the right hemisphere's special synthetic gestalt pattern is best in recognition and organizing work. Left hemisphere is analytic and verbal. People with right hemisphere damage in the block test may not be designed. Left hemispheric damages do not interfere with identification of facial expression and faces is also the work of the right hemisphere of someone. If the right side is damaged, it does not recognize the facts. Other gave an experiment in which two mirror image faces look which of the face is happy. People mostly speak happy to the face that is in their left side, i.e. right hemisphere. It also evidences that facial expressions and FRNES or FOS detection is the function of the right hemisphere. It also meets the work of gods, because the gods disassembled in the bacal deposits how to react the wrong thing. At last, other explains the concept of the plasticity of brain. A work inside brain there are redundant i.e. extra systems to do. So, brain adapts even when brain is ingestion or change. Brain is very flexible in early development. So if the left hemisphere is worse in childhood, the spike may shift to the right side. A man's exam was given which a major part of brain was missing. Yet he won the perfectly normal life, meaning brain can change its function as per environment and development. That's why the 20 sweet mind has a conscious mind possible without a large genetic change K. Bicameral mind means a brain that was divided in two parts, part of a god, part of a mind. Others says that this system came because there was a new social control to control large groups so that the little hunter can become a large agricultural societies from the gatherers group. Earlier animals like monkeys and bubis also live in groups, but they are groups limited as they are communication limited. A group from signals, sounds, body languages has a dominance greener in which a leader gives signals to everyone and all move it accordingly, as a group of gorillas. Early humans also lived in small groups, for about 30 people until the communication is simple. Group size could not increase. After that, if the language is invaluable, the gods and the bicameral mind was possible. The process of being a language is also in the stage. First, the simple sales or intentional sounds developed. Just as the denier signals speak louder and light voice for less denier, slowly came the modifiers, words like near or far. Then from the modifier commands began to become, guide any of the sharper or faster speaking in hunting. This led to tool making and hunting advances. After that, the name of animals and things came to nouns. As soon as the nouns came to Kiev, paintings and new tools appeared in the archaeological records. Verbal hallucination began to come as a side effect of the language at a point. This is an internal vice, such as the voice of himself or the chef, which helped in the work. As a man is doing upstream fishing, he is giving him a command in his mind. It reminds what to do is without concussion. The biggest leap came when names joined. Your name of people. It also reminds people to remember each other after their dies. Imagine them and beer's morning started. When one's voice began to be recognized by his name, hallucinations became social interactions. Listening to the voice of the dead chef. Then agriculture plants and animals were domesticated. This could lead to cities. Languages and hallucinated commands controlled the society and become so large groups possible. Other example gives Nathufian culture. People around 9000 BC began to stay in Kiev, but not in permanent round houses. Pits created to store food. Burials began to be elaborated. Now 200 people lived in a town. People weren't consecutive even in a much higher Nathufian culture than a group of 20-30. Signals were bound. Hearing the hallucinated command on the stress and the commands were in the form of king's voice. Whether king is alive or die. Even after king die, people listened to his hallucinated voice. So her grave and Tom there was so much importance. He became Tom Temple after kings die. His voice became God. So Tom of the dead king made the temple first. Gradually Astu or idol began to replace that dead king, as it happened in Egypt or Mesopotamia, and became the idol or Astu's center of social control. The real start of civilization took place here. Agriculture began to spread over the east. Farming settlements became common up to 7000 BC. Then cities went up to 10,000 people. The civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia rose from the same process. All this Bicameral mind and her hallucinated became possible because of gods. The structure of civilization, organization and control were all based on the same mental system. In this way, Bicameral mind created a bridge from small hunter-gatherer group to large civilization. Through social control of language and hallucinated voices took place, and similarly, the origin of gods can also be understood. Civilization means living in cities where not everyone knows each other. Others says that it was possible because of the 25 minds in which people listened to the inside of them or the voice of an idol king who guided them did. Wherever civilization started, a pattern appears in Near East, Egypt, India, China, Mesoamerica, or Andes. A large central building or god house rests small house around him. This god house was not really a house of a living princess but was either a house of Estu or of a hallucinated event. People are in the temple or in the church today as they are in front of the statue or idol from offerings. It also appears in the ancient town plains. Jericho Cattle Hayakadu and its cities Olmec and Maya pyramids Indian temples Cattle Hayak had a god rune near every house. There were stumises. The god house in Edu was formed on the platform, where the idol was sitting on an end and the offerings were the Jugarate Maya and Olmec pyramids all central god houses of U on the other end. The mountain temples of Hydas have also shown large gods with king, as god as guiding king, exactly the scene of the Bicameral Mind. Maya and Olmec civilization also had a large pyramid or god room. Horrors or FGs were important. Many pyramids also get the details. As king god becomes was gone, idols in Maya and their stela enfields were for all religious use. Indian civilizations also had god house idol or platform at every city center, such as Kash, Cheban, Machakas, Kia Hanako, Shimu, and finally, Anpur. Cain was considered to be god in an epir, the body of his mummified and kept in the temple and served daily of Estu maid. When they were dead, her servants and wives were killed with her, as it was in Egypt. When Spaniards came, they and their people are unfighted surrendered, just as someone is immersed, rather than automats. Others says it was probably the real confrontation of the bicameral mind and substitute mind. It is also visible in every culture to treat dead kings and instants were buried to people with their weights, food, ornaments, surveys, even animals, as he is still alive. IGP's pyramids, UK, Tom's, Indus Valley, and China's graves, Maya, and Indies burials all get this pattern. Many place food pots, tools, jewelry, vapons, meat in gravure. Some place so the dead buried under the house so that their things were with them. It's all going on as long as their hallucinated voices were heard. So they began to say gods. The role of idols and Effes also shows the bimetallicity. First of all were propped up croppers. Then by decorating the skills and then the small figurines of the clay stone middle are found in every Anthan culture. Hellier Egypt Mesopotamia Olmec Maya was designed to produce all such designs as exurgated eyes, open mouths, ears to create a hallucinated voice experience. The eye index of multiple idlers means the size of the eye was too large in the face's compartment. Others says it was for the power authority hypnosis to steer. It was triggered by the hallucination, taking the eyelid to the front steer and looking at the devotee. Water-flowing eyelids sound effects were also crimped, as the stone heads of Olmec in the Temple of Mary, the portrait statues of Maya, inside which ashes had been placed, or the motive of the reimaginary skills sub was that it could be heard of the dead's voice. Mayan idols had so much agenda that when the Spanish idol destring campaign millions of idols have accumulated a place. There was also an intent to carve the eyelids, and point the eyelid from the blood. Fasting, fear were carved in special heart. People took genuinely believe that idol says to him, Advies ask for sacrificial. There are also references in the literature that idols spoke. The unique text of Mesopotamia writes of the Spanish conquerors of the oral history Peru of the Old Testament asserts that the devil of them speaks of the idol. All this Bible mind supports hypothesis. Writing means starting with first images B, then gradually become the symbols of the sounds. The first was to remind either such as pictograms, glyphs of Maya or codices of Aztec. It was just the one who knows the already context. Slowly the writing evolve occurred and then such as the Egyptian, hieroglyphs and Mesopotamian kin form came which were half pictorial and half symbolic. There were more than 600 symbols in the form that used to extract different pilings in different contexts. A symbol could be sun, day, white, or anything else. Context makes sense was. Abstract was difficult to write things. So today's translators put extras with their understanding that could be wrong. Writing in the 3rd millennium BC shows that there were two types of theocracies. A steward king theocracy where king or chief city had a men god's caretaker. Second god king theocracy, where king himself was god. Steward king's system was in Mesopotamia, making India, China, and probably Mesoamerica. God king was in some Indian kingdoms in Egypt and probably in Japan. Both of them were the same. First dead hallucinated voice of king was heard. Then the new king got the authority. Every city had its own god in Mesopotamia. King was called tenant farm of the god. The real owner of the land was a statue god. Asthu is considered a god. His own house, i.e. the great house, was formed, placed at the center. The place of Jaghat was formed. God Astichu's service was the most important. He had to eat, drink, dressing, music, sex, wash with other god stuckas and remove everything. The kin account was later given to food god. If any of your leftovers offerings to get rid of God in anger or misery. It's all possible when people heard the voice of the genuinely statue, as the heroes of Iliad heard the voice of their gods. Also written in the texts such as Gudya's cylinder in 2100 BC, Priestesses was biped to take the diseases near God. The god's Ninegal in Klein 1700 BC was called the exciting vice commander examined speaker. In all places, God took the finals. His voice was heard. Several places stand out on the stelae stone columns, too. When reading them, hearing has a passion. When the voice was written, it was. Statues also had mouth washing and mouth opening ceremony so that their voice is refreshed again. Special craftsman was formed in the deification of the god while making a stumus and then used to mow with the Ibor at riverside which, as the complex culture occurred, hallucinated vices began to decrease. It turned out to be more visuals and more importance. Normal people did not hear the voice of the large god of direct city, but everyone had their own personal god to hear where. Every house had a shining of personal god. He also had mouth-washing ceremony. Personal god only brought messages from king or city god. King could also sometimes be hallucinated. Therefore, the name of some kings also gets the divine symbol. This symbol mostly found them in the end of their reign or just found in some of the cities, meaning the voice of some kings was powerful and they were considered to be a divine. But this boundary totally was over in Egypt. King himself was God in Egypt. It was possible because IGP's jugly simpel and was isolated. The filtration was unif, so the same form of the threshold was ticked. Memphite theology wrote on a granite block, says that all the gods so made of tongue voice. This is a language suite. IGP's myths had become Horus after king die and every living king Horus had. The dead king's hallucinated voice guided the living king and was put in all things to mummy body tomb. Pyramids, masts, stuckas, food, tools, slaves all kept with dead, as he is still alive. People also write a letter from the dead to their help seeking. True a voice seemed with the name of the dead, meaning is still heard of his voice. The main concept of the Egyptian psychology was, that means the authority voice that came from the inside of a man was in Egypt just like the personal god in Mesopotamia. The symbol of the two arms upwards, the passivate in the admonishing position was heard, as someone is giving voice instruction. Courtier said I did what I liked of king. The king made, meaning king's authority voice came inside that man. He began to give a direction. Many also comes in the name of kings. As many as the nest, Mika belongs to the king. The cocker role of king is also instant, as a bird or standard bearer looked with king in the form. Ba was another concept that mostly with like a visual horse. That was the visual version of the bird looked like or over time with stump and mostly tone like a flighting image grew up in social control complex was the number of gods and voices in the bicameral theocracy increased. The first small villages had a simple structure, but as everything was complex, the need for gods and priests and rituals increased. Sometimes the system was so overloaded that the whole chalapses had become, as the old kingdom of Egypt ended, or Maya civilization culps took place in Mesoamerica. When the authority was culps, people came back to the tribal living. Then after some time the civilization resumed. Mesopotamia did not have such a total chalapse as her stewarded king model was more reliant and started being used for writing civil use. 2100 BC, around judgments are written. That was the beginning of the law. It's easy to manage the large society from writing. The model of 1792 to 1750 BC law at the time of Hammurabi became the whole matter. All city-states were added to an authority. The civil control of writing took direct access. In the course of Hammurabi, all those who have written the louses came through the voice of his god Mercury. Hammurabi was just started. Hypnotic seers of God and King on Stela are listening to each other directory. No modern like conscious self-trance is simply obedience. Louses were not enforced by police, but so they were killed because they were written on this tale and everyone knew that this is the voice of God. As the use of writing grew and the control of the society in complex auditory hallucination began to decrease and the structure of the mind gradually changed. The life of the people was simple an accumulation of the Bible. There was no separate I or personal dot inside them. Everything happened by the voice of gods. All people were quiet in a greenery and thought to work immediately without listening to God's voice. But as wars, disasters, migrations began to come, all the system moved. The case came in this society, and the authority of gods began to gradually decrease. when there was such a confusing and alteration in the society that the sound of the garrison was either convicted or not able to work, the human beings had to think, stop and decide themselves. This pose gave birth to the conciseness. In the bicameral state, people lived quiet and friendly as they heard their voice. There was no private immigration or precursor, but when people from two different Bible civilizations meet, either friendship or dangerous hostility. Anyway, between no compromises did not occur, because both voices came from their own God and did not teach God compromises. As the cities grew up, the control of the LS and the hierarchy also complexes. If there was a little imbalance or crises, the whole system was collapsed. Signing and changing from writing. Writing has become the authority of God since the voice began to be written. Retained words could also be ignored or understood differently, while the auditory had to be followed immediately, so as to write trend magnified vine control gradually began to decrease. Second millennium BC has a large calamities. Just as volcano Thura's eruption, the mass migration, wars, and old civilizations were collapsed. Refugees, Indus, language barriers, and everything together was a big case that Gars could not guide some. When everything was ruined, the strange people of the hunger, death, and the new place all conferred the Toli to the Bicameral Mind. This stage failed. Asia is an exam. Earlier it was also a peaceful Bible city, but trade and the second civilization came from the contact of the Bible. When the collapse came 200 years in archaeology, when the Syrians rise back, there was unpressed military brutality, and there was the fear-based control that was never before. It shows that the first biker system was broken and people were now beginning to repel the new way from the fear and conscious planning. The tsunami ash and disaster, which was from the eruption of Thura volcano, ruined the entire Min-Epir Hittite Macedonians all. Everywhere the voice of the refugee invasion and anarchy gods became useless. When understanding don't come what to do, in this case, only IGPs were saved. The rest of the space was conscious. All of this breakdown wars became the bicameral mind in mass migrations and destruction. The voice of gods is not a hackbit. Everyone didn't understand anything in the Sishutes because his system had never faced such things. Strange people, strange language, everything was strange and God stopped guiding. Consciousness was born in this chaos. People first realized that the front is different from me. His thinking, speaking the way and the heavier is different. So there is something different inside it. That's what the inside self's idea came. First people looked in others that they have different minds. Then slowly it began to think in itself. That's the idea of the first second to see. The concept of neatness also came the same time. As people learnt the ability to remember past events or make storytelling by writing or listening to epics. First writing was just for inventory. Now the stories and history began to record. Muses or Apollo memory sources became in Iliad like oral epics in Greece, and people learned to remember to organize their past. It was also an instant step in the development of concussion. It is also a factor in cheating. Small level cheats are also used in animals, but there is a long cheat where a man thinks of something from the inside, does something else out. It can't do the Bible or animals. It's just possible when a man has an analog inside, be a separate self that can plan conservatively. This helps to survey the abilities as people in this war in the Ingress to plan from the inside, adjust from the outside, get the same escape. Natural selection also came in a little job. Those who were the most bickled were first dead in the stress and the disasters. They have less left bicameral or more adaptable people, which led to greater urgency in further generation. This process was not all biological, mainly came due to culture and language. But the survivors of people who are conscious because of the survival value, all of these things have been eliminated gradually, and subspensive conscience says. But this process wasn't good. May some people or small groups have already become conscious, but the whole society did not remain. This cultural norm was created only when a new kind of self-analog I in Mesopotamia, Greece and Baikal were refugees and the system of conscious mind developed. King Tukhti-Enurata of Syria around 1230 BC became a stone altar, in which king himself stands in front of his god, then sitting on the knees. But the biggest thing is that the chair of the god in front of him is empty. For the first time in history, it happened that king is nailing and the front is not lost. It's clear that the middle mind was broken. Gods did not sound. People always see God at the time of Hammurabi. After that all changed at the time of the trumpet. So, the time of Kulti is written in epic that Babylon's gods are angry with their people. So there is trouble over them and the Tukulti beats them. It never happened before that the gods go away from the people. This is the sadness of the second tablet. My God has left me. My gods has gone away. When there is no sound of God, the man feels sick, lonely. More gods will not come back even with prayers, sacrifices, priests and women readers. Just come the angst in the dream. Marduk's message. Then the man gets relief. The new themes of releases begin at the same time. People think that our sufferings are caused by mistakes, that God is offended, that it is probably back from our prayer. The idea such as redemption, forgiveness, sin began. Why are people asking for the first time? The first thing did the God side. It's not all. The voice of gods disappears from authority confused. Kings became the uncertain, cruel violent of gods without gods. Now they had to do their power proof. Tuchelt himself died in the revolt of his own son and miners. Fired in your new city. The first was not possible when everyone heard the voice of God. There were also some new culture ideas that were never before. As a proprietor, first people listened to the voice of direct God. Now invest with God. They compliment. Then tell your price. Then ask for help from God. Prayers became central. It was not all. Now there came a separate seriousness in the power and ship of God. Angel's idea also came after the same breakdown. Personal God in the first cylinder sails took the human to the main God. Now the first gods disappeared. Then became the symbol. Then the wings like angels lead the human to the symbol of God. Then the angs began to come in different forms. One's face is of man, one's birds, sometimes lying, sometimes bull. Anyas now bring from east sky, because now believed that gods live in sky. When gods did not sound, people felt that gods are now angry or have become a lifestyle. So the suffering in life, illness, Dexter began to come. The concept of the same time demands also came. Every trouble, illness, nightmare, sandstorm, fire, plague all began to be understood because of the dens. For protection, people used to do all the amulets, reconcilings, incantations, exorcism. It all became common in first millennium BC. Gods now became limited to some specials, prophecies, oracle, prest. Gods went away for the common man. The role of juggurates also changed. The first was the house of Juggurate God. Now they become a landing pad so that the god came back from sky to descend. The juggurates of the Kasabad and the Babe remain similar. Up an empty template, empty throne on the spiral ramp and summit. The story of the Tower of Babel of Genesis is also a mythological retelling of the same thing. When the voice of the gods is over, people find new ways to how to take it a season. Only then, the future of the divination, i.e., Shagan, becomes popular. The first method was Wumen. The next time will happen if there is a second event. Wumen was passive. People records do the future. The Wumen text in first millennium BC turned out to be so common that 30% of the tablets were about women in the library of Ashurbanipal. The logic of Wumis was simply the word association. Not all things to do is make home, birth, death, weather, stars, dreams. Everything began to be through the interpret of the women. Dream women also became popular. In this way, the breakdown of the middleman was taken. People began to work with the voice of gods from prayers, angs, demons, women's, and divination. Gods no longer became born in sky on earth, and the entire society is a new psychological phase entered where the subjugative conscience that developed began. Sortils was a way in which people used to throw shorter things such as sticks, stunts, bonuses, or beans in an active way to respond to the god. From this, yes or no man used to choose the ground or option. That time was not a concept on anyone. Everyone thinks that the rigid god decides. The real work of Sortiles was that when the right hemisphere that first listened to the voice of gods. When these right hemispheres are not working right and it came to Method in his place. The base of the Sortiles was also metaphor. They were considered to be the symbol of the Dad's Hukum. It was also used before. After the end of 2nd millennium BC, the property like important diseases will have the name of Anwara Temple's Passion or New Year. All sorts of disassembled. So the ancient dice or lords were created to respond to God. Not just for fun random chance. And over Y was another mode of divination, but it was more complex. It was qualitative, i.e. more people the answers were expected. First put the oil in water and saw how the oil is flowing. This moment understood what God wants: peace, rust, health or illness. Augury was a custom that made a special pressed baru. The first proprietor then found the massage of God in the body parts of oil, smoke, wax, ash or an animal. As the levers of animal with sacrifice, lungs, intestine were seen in the detail. The symbols of every marking were removed. It was the idea that God writes on his message animals' organs. That's why axis species, i.e. animal sacrifice became the biggest method, and the models of Ivan bronze and clay were created for him. Diagrams also get. Here everything was based on the metaphor. What are the shapes, colors, markings of organs? Spontaneous divination was the most freeform. There was no specific medium. The signs of God were seen in everything that looked in front. As people today find an answer to their price in a random sign. Mesopotamian text does not get its proof, but it was common and later Old Testament or Middle Agencies also get. So there were 4 main methods of divination. Omen, i.e. passive observation, Shortelays, i.e. active law drawing, Augury, i.e. watching science from ritual and seeing messages in spontaneous divination, i.e., random science. It was all the exhaust psychic ways. Take an eye out of real thinking. As the Bible Mind Week took place, it became a method strong and the place of the voice of God became the main source of decision making. All of this method step by step concierge closer to the structure of the methods. Like old Babylonian letters of humor by time consists of exactly simple formal bus orders. Reasons are not showing emotions. From 10 to B. But thousands of years later the Syrian letters become personal. The address consists of a real man. Compliance, fears, desert, emotions, and substitutes begin to come. Kings take constantly advice from their astrologers and diviner are Aphrodite, confused. Not all this first. Time began to think like space. In the first instance, it was written that in which season, which gods for building started. But after 1300 BC, king begins to write his old wakers, campaigns, events of every year systematically. History begins to write. Reasons, motives, criticism seem to be all the ads. It's all the evidence that people were coming to netization, substitute mind space and consciousness. It also looks different in Gilgamesh's epic. Dialogue simple is non-subjective in old tablets, while Gilgamesh and other characters in the later Assyrian version talk to their heart. Self-talks show the feeling of emos and inside. It was not earlier. In Greece, when the Dorian fled, everything was immersed. Mayan palaces, his art gold mask, idol all over. People were either killed or fled. All the ancient god-rule societies were broken. The seed of subspective conciseness was sown between this destruction. Here was not the slow momentum of big large cities like the Syrian. Here everything broke into small groups of shatters. This social chaos forced people to reminiscent of poems and epic stories to remember their identities. Epic singers refugee camps in order to tell people the poem so that some unity returns some old sense of order. That's the rise that the role of poetry and art in Greece became too large and the Greek conscience had turned out to be the intellectual light. The main point of understanding Eliot is that the real piling of words like mind or soul is not like today. Iliad has a user of 7 main words: thumos, frens, nous, saki, kredi, every eater. These words are translated like mind, spirit, soul, or heart. But in Iliad, they just mean body parts or there was some objective senses. There was no inner mind space. Gods took real decision. The role of these words comes just when the voice of gods is decreasing. Author says that when the middleman came to the peak, he hallucinated God did not sound until the stress was too high. Then there were some physical senses like heart palpitations, breathing, abdominal workouts inside the human being, and they were called thumos, frans, kredi, eater. All this is precacious hypostasis, meaning this bodily when there is no sound of God reactions become a regeneration of action. Other explains this phase. Phase 1 objective. This word just explains the action or sensing out. Phase 2 internal. Now this word begins to be used for the inside session of the body. Phase 3 subjective. Now this word is used for inner mental process. Just think, remember, plan. And the phase 4 synthetic, i.e. all hypostasis together create a new thing that we call conscious mind. Thumos is the most important word. First it was just the name of the activity, again it came to tell the inside stress, that is, anger, adrenaline, the tightness of the muscles. Gradually make the metaphor that thumos is a container with strength can be inserted. It is like a second person to talk about. It gives the idea of the inner space for the first time. Then the phrenes is relayed by this word, mostly lungs or breath. The first language in the objective sense, then the pattern of the briefing in the internal fun again became the metaphor that the phrenes keeps or reconfigure something, meaning our mantle from the body's breath conditioned state looks. Sometimes the phrenes is also shown like the other person that can be pursued or spoken. Kredi came from this word heart, earlier just shown like beating or trembling branch, then shows heartbeat or esity in the inner sense. You can also put the curse or strength in it, meaning the container of the metaphor is being used. Then with such heaters and nos, all these words were first body parts or physical reactions, then became the foundation of mind space gradually by becoming a metaphor. The main action God still in Perliad dictation occurs only. The role of these words is subsidiaries. It does not take major diseases. The conscious mind of the future in a way in the POM is showing beaten in 7 different entities. Everyone has its own function, but not one. Odyssey comes after Eliad, and the way to think between the two has changed exactly. OZ is not the same epic, but the addition of short lost stories that were later added around of the character of Odysseus. The character of Odysseus shows that when the whole old order broke, the strength of gods decreases, the human beings work smarter, cheating, and wisely had to run. This is the hero of the new personality that is not a dependent on old gods, and gods in this is not in power as before. He has become a defaulter. to Spain, magic wands use, but the deceased people now take themselves. The role of gods is reduced. Human characters have become more active. Venderings, this just says kidnappings. Secrets in the story show that now the subjugative 80 develops. All this post is the effect of Dorian social breakdown. Language has also changed. In Odyssey, the use of words such as franis, nuz, and saki has become 3 times, while Thomas's use is reduced. Thymos that had earlier emergency reaction now became passive, and the rest of the hypostasis such as nuz, franis, saki is now shown as subspectivity, inner space, memory, morality. Thymos is now shown as each other person. Secrets are kept in fresheners. Nose now comes in caning and planning. Psyche now began to be used like lifespan or time span. The first things that gods do now are parts inside the human beings. Morality for the first time. Loyalty of Finlip, offering of Omius is dependent on the good of Saw Francis. There was nothing before. The story of OC itself is the discovery of an identity. It's a journey of a man who wasn't something without the first gods, but now looking for your identity and will. The entire epic is a metaphor when the human being turned out to be a concierge-free man in himself from the unconscious slavery. The poems of the hands come after OC, such as Vex and Days, which is now not a hero or epic but a farmer's life, where present justice daily strigal morality time plans all some have come. Here are the Thomas, friends, news all now being used like storage space. Put the adwise in funnel or handle it in thumos. The idea of justice came. Die now became the right direction or justice. The place of the voice of gods came to the right of the human self. Time is now being thought like space. The relationship of the past, present, future is visible. Planning has come. In his individuality, feelings, love, anger, personal desires all began to write. In the lives century, BC's liver and elk poets like Terpenter Singleco's safe poetry. Here freshness, Themos knows all inner space self-talk designers began to show. Sifo dissipates its Thomas and friends. Noma thoughts comes the use of vicious. Soda is the first time use of conscienza. This is now not just the hark battle is the world of your personal life. Suffering, love, jealousy, introspection. Then Solon comes the leader of Athens that first shows Nous as a unity proper mind. Nous is the most important hypostasis in his palms, and his use is like today. Thinking, judgment, decision-making, self-responsibility. Solon says, his bad work for himself blem. No gods, this is the first time when know the self it looks the concept to see itself I. Now the analog I or self-create became in mind space. 6th century also changed the psyche world in BC. It's not just a life, but a lot which began to be different from the body. It also contains the influence of the IGPs B and K, and the idea of the soul transmigration of Pythagoras also changed it. Soul and soma body are separated. Dualism came, the effects of which further the Platogistism began to appear on the Christianity decor all. In this way, the Greek mind had a big change through the language and the metaphors since the Dorian invasion. The first parts of the body now became the inner mental space, memory, morality, self-hooded soul. A new dot with every new word became a new twig. From OC to Let's Solon, and then until the change of Saki shows the complete process of how a conscious self-aware became a human society and culture. That is the birth of the Greek conscience says. In the end of the last 2nd millennium BC, there were a lot of different people in the Middle East. Those who did not have their place were refugees. After some Aryan and Dorian advance of Thura, after the fall of some Assyrian and Hittite Epir, all of them were called city-states Kabru i.e. vagrants and small thieves Lutura and continued to move in deserts. That's why you become a Hebrew. The Old Testament really means the breakdown of the middleman and its place to come to the subspeciality. But many books of the beginning of the Old Testament were actually written later, created from old different sources such as 2 separate criteries of Genesis, or the story of Joseph is several 100 years later. First of all, Deuteronomy's manuscript found in Jerusalem in 621 BC, when King Hosea removed the old 24th customs in the name of cleaning. Compare Ker Amos is an old Nabi i.e. prophet a century BC's absolutely bicameral, planning to think inside them. Nothing just tells the voice inside the 10 spikes the Lord speaking. On the other hand, Asiasi's 2nd century looks less in BC, and the ovarian makes everything think in metaphors. This is the subactive concussion. In Amos I'm thinking about it. While osthesis show old analog I, books like Genesis, Exodus, and Non are nostalgia. When the voice of the Yave had been heard clean when the old Bakel was deposited. Elam is a powerful vase word. That was the voices of many gods before. Gradually all Elam finished. I just saved thee, and in the stories I became God. The hair was also in the villages. Everywhere the story of your fall is the midst of the breakdown of the Bible mind of Adam, even serpent, and the coming of consciousness. Serpent that is crafty, i.e. conscious, feeds them fruit. Then both have their nakedness, i.e. let your image look at another, which is subspeciality. The garden could first talk to God. Now he finished the experience. Hebrew prophecies are called nabis that come in a trance and speak the voice from the inside. Nabis feeling is such as being hot coal in the mouth or fired inside, which is not quenched until it speaks. Nabi, i.e. the prophecies, are a little subactive. Visual component in their experience gradually decreased. The first God looked, after only the voice, then just the retained law, then just a nostril sense. Even in the time of Moss, God gets a face-to-face. Sometimes just becomes the burning bush or the cloud, or just becomes the tablets of law. If we look at the human history very far, we notice that it is a very slow process to come from the middle of mind to the conscience. And still we have not found out completely. Even today our lives, culture, law, releases, politics all over the place left old Bible mind marks are. The release is the largest exam. Every big moment of our life leads from birth to death, in marriage, confession, everything in temples or churches, where the concept of God is still central. Laws are also inspired by old divine rules. The national symbols, oaths, is referring to God in all, whether it's not a voice. Releasing Kents has always been, no matter how much the science develops. There's a stretch on the side of a few large mysterious divines from the inside of the human being, who never meets. Jesus began a new religion in which he spoke to change from the inside. The church never left finding the bicameral absolutes of the external miracles and ability or divine authority. All of the institutes are giving references to the auditory or authorities to prove their authenticity as much as we go away from the breakdown of the bicameral mind. As much as we felt the need to find the source of our authority. When the voice of God stopped listening to the prophets' fates, oracles, suns, astrologers, mediums, swims, Ouija boards all come out. All this is the residue of the old Bible mind. We all had an archaic find autonomy. Some of us that we have not alone that gods are just silent. Oracles is the most obvious example by camera. The Greek oracles such as Delphi remain the central decision makers for 1,000 years. At the same time, prisms went to their trance without thinking about the direct elements. As Apollo is speaking himself, people came from the entire Mediterranean, Hortifi were offerings and then asked their questions. The result of Delph's prisms was the result of the mass bill of complete culture Billy that hears the voice of God comes, so he could go into trance and respond immediately. All this is part of general Bicameral paradigm. Collective belief, ritual, induction, trance, and arctic authorization. The revival of the eyelids took place at the end of the oracle. The first eyelids were everywhere, in front of which hallucinated voices had heard, but when the voice disappeared, the eyelids were broken or left. Yet when the voids came in the release, the eyelids came again. Temples full of statues. People try to take prophecy from them, use magical or chemical induction. Idols had a number of technologies to fill the divine spirit. Herbs, James, magic names, etc. It was all so possible as people were built on the Abuslot dualism. If soul can come to the body of human beings, why not stumble? The first people in the middle of the Bible have a voice of God from inside. But as the conciseness I had reduced the voice, and then the position came. That's how to come to God or spirit inside a person. Speak through him, but that person does not remember anything later. First of Iliadodacy in Greece time was nothing. On 400 BC the position was common. Plato said that the poses people speak true but they do not know themselves what they are speaking. Philo-Judaeus and later thinkers also said that when the prophet is poised, he has his own thinking and another spirit speaks in his body. This position does not have hallucinations such as real Bible mind, but its conciliation of the human being is closed and there is something else speaking. Possession and bicameral mind is different, but both of them serve social functions. The society gives authority messages and guidance. All people in the Bible could hear the voice of God's. On the position, some silly people like prophets, oracles, mediums go into such trance through training and give the message of God. It is also possible that the right hemisphere in this trance becomes more active. Left hemisphere that controls our normal conscience set and speech different from it. This is why mostly women's oracle was formed because they have more balance in both hemispheres. As society ration went into public oracles and positioned private girls, mediums simple and young people were made. The training was given from the induction visuals such as smoke, dance, special dress so that they can move into trance. Sometimes the mediums had to say that if the wrong spirit came, then the storm may be wrong, or if the vil spirit came, some would speak upright. Both poetry and music were introduced from the bicameral mind. In old deposits, when the voice of the God in the minds of the people, it was in the form of mostly poetry or song. Gray epics, Vedas, the divine messages that came to the oracles, all were in the rivers. It was because when the god's side was spoken, the mostly poetry was the same, and people listened to poetry in their minds throughout their day. As the middle minds were over and the conscience says were only given through messages of poets and prophets poetry. Because poetry had a separate power, authority and feel-good factor that didn't get into the prize, the poet was considered to be a knower in the ancient Arabic, meaning a spirit has given her knowledge. Metered Riamed Elitiard Spitch divine origin was considered a sign. The real form of poetry was song, and there was a special role of pitch and rhyme in the song. Ancient poetry was mostly singed and left hemisphere i.e. speech and right hemisphere i.e. song and music had different work here. Medical evidence says that when the left hemisphere damage occurs, the person cannot speak. Meaning is the work of the song right hemisphere, and the same area also had a bicameral hallucination. The deep connection of music and grandchildren is also due to the same and why the ant poets lay fluids played so that the right hemisphere and the divine speech area are activated. When the poetry left began to be remembered by hemisphere, the music's use decreased and poetry's divine touch also gradually decreased. Both poets and oracles first heard the voice of God. Then as the consciousness poets had to learn to write themselves without the muse or the divine spirits. Poetry was a divine given first, but as the Bible mind disappeared he became a human craft. Yet in the poetry, it's still the look of nostalgia, a lost divine connection, old authority. So today, poems also have other world prayers or Annan's words. Now the cautious poet imitates its eye, he missizes old divine adders, now without the same real divine feeling. But after the indication of hypnosis, all things go smoothly without hard work. Hypnosis is a strange and unique thing in the world of psychology, as it challenges the thought of our normal conscious control and personality. Hypnosis is therefore possible as it activates a mental pattern like the old Bible mind that has greater control over contusion. The origin of hypnosis was also derived from the metaphor, as Mesmer made Newton's gravity a metaphor of traction among people, then the magnetic traction, then animal magnetism. Mason magnets used to use. Presence the magnets showed that their illness will be cured, and because the painter also believed, he felt the same effect, meaning that everything was dependent on belief and expectation. Afterwards the place of magnets began to work by hand touch or passes, yet the bearing remained the same. It all happened because people's bilingual system and collective thinking were the same as hypnotists told. Hypnosis changes with nature time, as the concepts of people were changed in the society. Mrs. Cost did the presence in the deposit, then speaking in trance, then trance after all, forget everything. Then the phrenology I came to the division when pressing the scalp. Shurkot tells 3 stages. Catalepsy, lethargy, monobolism. What is happening in the mean hypnosis dips on a collective, cognitive imperative, group, bilingual system. The induction process in hypnosis is very important. There are different ways, but the main motive is to narrow the sensations of the human being. Just pay attention to the sound of the hypnotist. Unless the man does his attention just focus on the operator, he cannot go into hypnosis again. It can be easily from practice. Just as oracles or mediums had the practice of going to trance. The man's concussion in trance does not work. He does not see himself. He does not know that he is hypnotized. If the operator in deep trance rests anything, then the subject assumes. The pen can be blocked. Imams can change. Identity can also change. It's all like edgy EFF acting. Just as the hypnotist said, if you are 6 years old, the man will live in a hellish manner. There is no executive regression on. Some people think hallucination occurs in hypnosis, but in reality, he is acting like holding or seeing the invisible thing. Sometimes we all feel like a little bit of a middleman in our life, as we hear voices or lost in our little ones. But in some people whose dopamine system is overactive or the enzymes that break the chemicals of the stress are low, this experience becomes very intense and scary. They have voices that give orders. Lost your boundaries. Time drops. Some are on don't know. Don't feel yourself. Everything seems automatic, so someone else is controlling. It is known as schizophrenia in the state hospital, but others says it's basically to go back to the middleman. The old deposit is the waste. People were not considered differently mad or insane as long as the Bible was in the history. There is no concept of madness in old stories like Iliad. As the consciousness came, the insanity was understood in the bicameral words. Plato also divined the gifts said from madness or God's side. In the beginning, people who had taken abnormal behavior were also considered a divine. But gradually, when the conscious society grew up, the entity began to understand the illness and separated such people from the society. Vices in schizophrenia is more reliability, addict, or controlling. Tillite states also feel the presence release vicence, ceremony, worship, and divine conversation in the mental states of the beach. Paranoia is also often triggered with a hallucinated reliability experience, talking to God or angel. The analog I fall means that your own feeling, its identities are over. Patients feel that he is not himself. Everything is being automated or they are not able to exit or control the I. There is no control over your body or your littles. It seems I finished. Sometimes the present speak I am every time or reap one word to save themselves. If the mind space falls, then the present feels that he is not able to think or is getting the thought depression. Such presents are not able to imitate themselves or vices. As prite and play or hypothetical functions are not possible. Time also goes as sense. Everything is stopped or slowed. Schizophrenia also had some evolutionary advantage. Just as the phlegm is not enough to work until the long duration, the sensory perception, being more cursed, he notices everything. Overs are involved in the environment, not looking for forests, see every tree, probably because of the old-fashioned people used to make pyramids, trellis without tiredness. Other further writes how oracles, releasings, hypnosis, schizophrenia, poetry, music, all things inside us are the brain of an old way, bicameral mind. This list is not compatible. On this are some of the most obvious agglomerates. When we understand how it hits things and new consciences themselves, then we understand ourselves. Most people think science and release is the enemy of each other, but the real enemy was between the church and the science. Both were reliably. The authority of the church was from the anthit prophet to the divine voices. Science had its own authority, innovating experience and nature. The scientific revolution basically was to find the authentication of another way, replacing the priest himself with nature to get the divine reply. Science's specialty was a new search with Protestant and nationalist thinking. After the Enlightenment for a lost divinity, and some of the scientists in specialty Germany refused to complete the releases or spirit expressions. Only physical chemicals were the ultimate aim of loss. Helmholtz gave principle of energy conservation. Bala is not in any divine force universe. Everything closed system. Then Darwin and Wells also eliminated from the theory of evolution that human or life is a design plan. Everything is dependent on blind moons and survival. All of this have brought the idea that now we have to become our authority. No God, no divine voice coming. The power of the release gradually decreased. Rituals also weakened. People do not know. Now what should they be? Those who gave visual ceremony, by leaves, sometimes identity and meaning, and also began to be irrelevant. Science, when released, the new things came like the same if they're replaced. Potion releasing astrology, teaching meditation, sensitivity training, mind control, psychology, UFOs, ESP drugs, spiritivity is all trying to find new space from which we can get a direction or authority. Science is still beginning to create its own pseudo-releases. Others says that these would be synterisms such as medical materialism. Everything would be fixed with nutrition, medicine, education, or marks that have the answer to the class strangle everything, or psychoanalysis that everything happens from the repressed sexuality, or Bilvism, that everything is shaped by reinforcement. It also needs recycles canonical text, leaders and commitments, and followers get a worldview. An explanation gets what is right, what to do. It also becomes a kind of superstition when a small truth is applied to the entire universe. Further, other writes that the book came to 10 years. Different reactions of people. Some people think that a little mistake will spoil everything. On the other says this book is a hypothesis, but rather 4 different big ideas on the base and all there is independent in yourself. The first hypothesis that is the base language of conscience. People mistakenly think that conscience does not mean that it is not the case on the session. As we react without thinking when driving, he is a reflection. No conscience. Consciousness makes the analog I in the aquatic mind space that nurtures its littles like story. It is possible because of the language. We also imprint time like a space. The second hypothesis is the bicameral mind. There was a different mentality before conscience set in which people had heard voices that hallucination is also normal, not just illness. Children listen to imagery friends. Some people hear voices without any illness. This means the base of high hallucination is genetic and it was normal in old deposits. The third hypothesis that the consciousness came when the bicameral mind broke. There are 2 positives. A conscience was started with the language. The second one who says author is very recent. Around 1000 BC when the old 24 civilization broke out from the coming of social problems, overpopulation and writing. Next, new reliability practices such as prayer, ship and divination, so that people can get orders of gods again. The fourth hypothesis is a matter of double brain, right and the left hemisphere. The work of the right hemisphere is to add things, synthesize such as creating block designs or explaining music. This is the work that used to do old deposits. In schizophrenia, when people hear hallucination, the right temporal lobe is more active. It shows from brain scan. On this hypothesis may be wrong, yet the rest of the idea will remain valid. Then others says 1000 BC in Greece after the cognitive expulsion occurred. For the time, thinking, and process of new words such as chronos, ignosis, genesis, analysis, people could now imagine, recall, rejuvenate, or who. That's how to make a self-concept. First was just the name, now became an inside self that thinks who I am. Self also means confused, as animals can also holes on the spot on their shuffles in the mirror. But this doesn't mean they have their own consciences. That's just a hactic. Imagination or life not reflective. Then other explains that our implications were also changed from cautiousness. As the first fair was just afraid, now she became an expert. That is, we can repeatedly think of the suffering, problems or fear of our futures or pasts and converts to ezidi. Shem was first only on the break of the group, but now he became guilt. That is, when we remember wrong work or sin or think about it in the future, Gilly feels. It does not have a biological off switch of MOs. So, forgiveness, such as rituals and ceremonies escape goat, mass etc. Also revenge the effects of sex. The first was on the meeting bus trigger in the animals or the 20-year-old man. Human beings after conscience that began to fight sex. Increase both controls and prompts from imagery. The core of all of these ideas is that it's all a new thing to use human conscience as self-emulations such as guilt, anxiety, and sex. The process that came after the 20 frequent mind breakage and took place at different times in different cultures. So much for today. We will then find you in a new episode, a new topic together. Thanks.